A veteran thinks his uncle's summer house on a lonely North Carolina hill is nothing more than sun-faded paint and old memories, until his dog starts barking at the ceiling above them. Under the heavy heat of an Asheville summer, Ethan Miller returns to the small house his uncle left behind, expecting nothing but silence and dust. Ethan discovers a box hidden for nearly 50 years, a box filled with gold, and a warning that someone dangerous is still searching for what lies beneath the house. If this opening pulls you in, tell us where you're watching from, your city, your state, or your country. And don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories about veterans, loyalty, and the secrets that refuse to stay buried. The summer heat settled thick over Asheville, wrapping the hills in a slow, humming warmth that clung to every leaf and porch rail. Ethan Miller pushed open the creaking wooden gate at the bottom of the old stone path, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a weathered hand. At 55, he was tall and lean, in a way shaped not by vanity but by years of carrying burdens far heavier than his own body weight. His face bore deep, permanent lines from sandstorms and sleepless nights, and the short gray stubble along his jaw only hardened the impression that life had demanded too much from him for too long. A faint scar sliced from his left cheekbone toward the jawline, a memory from a roadside explosion in Kandahar that had taken two friends and most of the belief he once had in simple things like luck. Beside him walked Ranger, an 8-year-old German shepherd with a black saddle across his back, a copper-brown chest, and a gray-touched muzzle that gave him the look of an aging but unshaken soldier. His ears stood alert, always reading sounds before Ethan ever noticed them. Ranger wasn't just a companion. He had been Ethan's canine partner during his final deployment, the one who dragged him out of debris and refused to leave his side when morphine blurred the world. Loyal, calm, and fiercely protective, Ranger carried his own scars too, a faint notch on the right ear from shrapnel, and an anxious tremble whenever thunderstorms rolled in. Ethan climbed the slope toward the house his late uncle, Benjamin Miller, had left him, a small 2-story summer home with sun-bleached siding, a slanted red roof, and ivy wrapping the porch columns like old memories hugging the bone structure of the past. He had only met Benjamin a handful of times as a child, remembering him as a tall, quiet man with silver hair always tucked behind his ears and a voice that felt like gravel lined with patience. The kind of man who read newspapers on porches rather than speak his mind, who smiled with only half his mouth, who carried secrets but never shared them. The screen door squealed when Ethan pulled it open. The interior of the house was dim, dust floating through a single beam of sunlight cutting across the wooden floor. The air smelled of pine, old varnish, and something else. Something metallic, faint, almost like the residue of time itself. He stood there a long moment, letting his eyes adjust. The house felt untouched, as if Uncle Benjamin had stepped out only yesterday instead of 2 summers before his passing. "This'll do for a while," Ethan murmured, his voice low and gravelly. But the truth was more tangled. Returning here stirred something unsettled in him. Memories of childhood trips, the way Benjamin used to tap the attic door twice before going upstairs, as though addressing someone unseen. Ethan tried to shake it off. War had made superstition clingy, sticking to the edges of his thoughts like cobwebs that refused to be brushed away. Ranger took 3 slow steps inside, then stopped dead center of the living room. His body stiffened, ears forward, tail lowered but not tucked. His gaze locked upward toward the narrow wooden hatch that led to the attic. Ethan muttered, dropping his duffel and running a hand over his short gray hair. "It's just a musty house, boy." But even he didn't believe it. Ranger never froze like that unless something was wrong, unless something didn't belong. His instincts had once saved a squad of men from an IED buried under 6 inches of sand. "Come on," Ethan coaxed, but Ranger didn't budge. His amber eyes tracked the attic door as though expecting it to move. Ethan followed his stare, feeling an unexpected shiver crawl up his spine. The hatch sat flush with the ceiling, its edges slightly darker than the surrounding wood. It looked undisturbed, sealed by decades of dust. And yet, the house seemed to breathe differently around it, as if holding something in. He stepped toward the wall beneath the hatch and felt the temperature shift, a pocket of warm air pushing down like breath. He blinked hard. Heat fatigue, he told himself, nothing more. He tried to distract himself by walking through the house, checking the kitchen with its chipped blue cabinets, the small guest room with a sagging bed frame, the back porch where his uncle had once carved initials into the railing. But every time he turned back toward the living room, Ranger was still there, unmoving, staring at the attic. "What's gotten into you?" Ethan asked softly. Ranger answered with a low rumble, not a growl but a warning, quiet, controlled, the sound of a soldier signaling danger without causing alarm. Ethan knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on his back. "We're here to rest," he whispered, "not to dig up ghosts." But Ranger didn't look at Ethan. His gaze never left the attic. And in that moment, with the weight of summer pressing against the windows and the hum of cicadas rising outside, Ethan felt something shift inside him, like the slow turning of a key in a lock he didn't know existed. For the first time since arriving, the house no longer felt empty. It felt watched. And whatever waited above them, behind that sealed wooden hatch, had been waiting a very long time. The late afternoon sun stretched long amber streaks across the backyard as Ethan Miller hauled a pile of brittle branches toward the burn barrel. The air smelled of warm earth and wild grass, and cicadas buzzed with a relentless rhythm that filled the emptiness around the old summer house. Sweat rolled down Ethan's temple, soaking into the collar of his gray shirt. But the work kept his thoughts steady, something he desperately needed after Ranger's strange fixation on the attic earlier that morning. The house had stirred something inside him, and the feeling hadn't faded. If anything, it clung tighter. That was when he heard it, a soft, deliberate creak of wood coming from inside the house. Not the sigh of timber settling in heat, not the house shifting with time. A distinct sound, like a board being pressed from the other side. Ethan froze, fingers tightening around the rake handle. Ranger's ears shot up, his entire body stiffening as he turned toward the back door. Without waiting for a command, the shepherd trotted inside, fur bristling in a warning Ethan had learned never to ignore. Ethan followed, his boots thudding against the worn porch boards. As soon as he stepped into the living room, he saw it. The attic door trembled ever so slightly, as if someone were pushing up against it from above. But the house was sealed tight. No open windows, and not even a hint of wind. He swallowed hard, forcing logic to the front of his mind. Old hinges, maybe warping in the summer heat. Still, the sight sent a cold thread down his spine. He grabbed the old ladder he had found earlier leaning against the shed. A wooden thing with splintered sides, likely as old as Benjamin himself. Ranger paced beneath him as Ethan positioned it under the attic hatch. "You stay close," Ethan murmured. Ranger responded with a low woof, tail stiff. Ethan climbed carefully, each step groaning under his weight. When he pushed against the attic door, a thin layer of dust drifted down like a soft, reluctant exhale. The hatch gave way with a creaking protest, and a wave of stale, trapped air met him, thick with the scent of old wood, varnish, and the faint sweetness of something long forgotten. He raised his flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing a cramped space with slanted beams, cobwebs thick as lace, and boxes collapsed under decades of time. The dust was undisturbed except for a narrow path that suggested someone, long ago, had walked directly to the far corner. Ethan pulled himself onto the floorboards, wincing as they flexed under his weight. Ranger stayed below, staring upward but refusing to climb. The shepherd had faced gunfire before, but wouldn't set paw on this ladder. That alone made Ethan tread more cautiously. He followed the faint path until the flashlight caught on a shape draped in a heavy, weathered tarp. The cloth was gray with age, edges curled and brittle. Ethan crouched and peeled it back. Beneath it sat a wooden chest no larger than a toolbox, but reinforced with brass corners and a tarnished lock that looked hand-forged, something old, deliberate, and meant to endure. As he lifted it, the weight surprised him. Heavy, too heavy for just heirlooms or relics. His pulse quickened. With effort, he pried open the lid. A warm gleam burst through the dust. 8 gold bars, thick and raw in their simplicity, wrapped carefully in oiled canvas, each one stamped with refinery marks dating back decades. Tucked beside them was a sealed envelope, its paper yellowed and brittle. Ethan unfolded it with shaking hands. The handwriting inside, sharp, confident strokes, belonged unmistakably to Uncle Benjamin. "If you've found this, then the house has given up one of its secrets. But do not look above for danger. What they want lies below. Do not trust anyone, and do not let them find what's under the house. They will come back. Benjamin." Ethan exhaled, the attic suddenly feeling smaller, heavier. His uncle had been quiet, yes, but also cautious, watchful. A man who spoke sparingly, who weighed every word. The letter felt like the echo of a man who had lived with fear far too long. Fear and responsibility. Ranger barked sharply from below, claws skittering on the wood. Ethan hurried back to the hatch and climbed down as Ranger paced in tight circles, nose pressed against the floorboards. Not toward the attic, toward the ground beneath the house. Ethan knelt, running his fingers over the wooden planks. They felt ordinary, but Ranger's instincts were never wrong. The shepherd let out a low, uneasy whine. "Whatever it is," Ethan whispered, "it's not up there. It's down here." He looked toward the attic door, still hanging open above. A house full of unlocked memories and a warning that something much more dangerous waited in the dark. His heart thudded once, heavy as the gold sitting in the chest behind him, and he knew the quiet summer he had hoped for was over before it even began. Night settled over the Asheville hillside with a soft, humid heaviness, the kind that made the trees along the slope stand still and listening. Ethan stepped onto the porch with a worn flashlight and a coil of unease inside his chest. Ranger padded beside him, the shepherd's fur bristling in the thick summer air. The gold bars upstairs had already changed the atmosphere of the house. What once felt like an aging home now felt like a pressure chamber. Ethan tried to shake the feeling off, telling himself he was being paranoid, but the war had taught him that instinct rarely lied. He walked the perimeter like he'd done countless nights during his deployments. Gravel shifted beneath his boots. Fireflies blinked along the weeds. Everything seemed normal until Ranger froze near the left side of the house, nose pressed close to the earth. Ethan crouched beside him. The beam of the flashlight revealed a print in the soil, a boot print, deep enough to belong to someone heavier than Ethan, someone who had stood there long, watching, and not one print, 2, 3, leading away into the tree line. Ethan straightened, his shoulders tensing. Someone had been close. Too close. He circled back toward the front porch, and that was when he noticed something glinting near the windowsill. A tiny black object tucked into the corner where the wood had warped. He plucked it free. A listening device, no bigger than a thumb. Commercial grade, not cheap, not amateur. Ranger let out a low growl, a deep sound that vibrated against Ethan's knee. The dog's amber eyes tracked the woods, ears forward, body rigid. He was already sensing what Ethan hadn't fully accepted. Someone had been inside their perimeter. Ethan swallowed hard and checked the back wall of the house, sweeping his light slowly. His stomach tightened when he saw it, an ashy gray symbol smeared onto the wooden siding like a ghostly handprint, a circle crossed by a vertical slash. He stepped closer. It wasn't a handprint. It was a mark, a warning. Ethan recognized it from his time working security years before, a field sign used by private contractors who operated outside legal oversight. Groups paid to threaten, intimidate, and reclaim property without paperwork. And one name surfaced in his memory like a bad taste: Burnell Group, a shadowy organization tied decades ago to industrial accidents and land disputes around North Carolina. They had vanished after a scandal involving the Chimney Rock Mining Company in the early 70s, after a water contamination case that mysteriously disappeared from public records. The letter in the attic had mentioned danger tied to this land. Ethan felt the truth of it gathering like heat in his ribs. He stepped inside and shut off the lights. The house fell into darkness, thick as ink. Ranger stayed close, nudging Ethan's leg as if urging him to move slow. Ethan crouched near the window, keeping low, scanning the yard. A minute passed, then another. Only cicadas filled the silence. Then Ranger's posture snapped into full alert. His muscles stiffened, and a deep rumble formed in his throat. Ethan followed the dog's stare to the edge of the woods, where the tall pines cast long, unmoving shadows. But tonight, the darkness shifted. 3 silhouettes detached themselves from the tree line, shaped like men but swallowed by black clothing. Their movements were steady, confident, rehearsed, not prowlers, not drifters, professionals. Ethan's heartbeat slowed in the familiar way it had in combat, that cold, razor-sharp awareness replacing fear. Ranger stood slightly ahead of him, tail lowered, ready. One of the figures stopped at the edge of the clearing. A man stepped forward, his height average, his build lean, but his posture unmistakably firm. The faint moonlight revealed a narrow face with sharp cheekbones and a trimmed beard along a squared jaw. Whoever he was, he held authority in the way he carried himself. A man used to giving orders. His voice cut across the yard, calm, almost casual, yet loaded with a warning. "You're holding something that doesn't belong to you." Ethan kept still, hands clenched at his sides. "I don't know who you are," he called back. "But you're trespassing." The man chuckled lightly, an unsettling sound. "We don't want your gold, Mr. Miller. That's not why we're here." Ethan's breath hitched. They knew his name. The man continued, "There's something under this house, something that belongs to us, and we intend to reclaim it." Ranger growled louder, lips curling, his stance low and ready to leap. But as suddenly as they had appeared, the three figures backed into the shadows. Their departure was swift, almost ghost-like. Within seconds, the forest swallowed them whole. Ethan didn't move. The silence afterward was too clean, too purposeful, as if the night itself was waiting for him to break. Only when Ranger nudged his hand did Ethan exhale. His pulse steadied, but the fear did not leave. Instead, it settled deeper, settling with the weight of the gold and the warning in Benjamin's letter. Whoever those men were, they weren't there to threaten. They were there to claim. And they'd be back. Morning crept across the Asheville hillside in a wash of gold and pale mist, the kind of summer light that made the air feel warm even before the sun rose fully above the trees. Ethan stepped into the living room with a mug of stale coffee, trying to shake the weight of last night's encounter. Ranger had barely slept. The shepherd prowled between windows until dawn, ears twitching at sounds Ethan couldn't hear. As Ethan sat on the worn sofa, Ranger suddenly stiffened. The dog's head turned sharply toward a spot near the far corner of the living room, the same area he had sniffed around the night before. Without warning, Ranger trotted forward and began pawing at the floorboards, nails scraping with frantic insistence. Ethan set down the cup. "Easy, boy. What is it now?" But Ranger wasn't acting on nerves. His movements had purpose, determination, the same instinctive urgency Ethan had seen countless times during search and clear missions overseas. The shepherd's tail was rigid, his body angled forward, digging at the gaps between planks as if he knew something was buried alive beneath them. Ethan knelt beside him and ran his hand across the floor. The plank Ranger focused on was slightly raised at one end, just enough to catch the touch. Ethan fetched a screwdriver from the drawer, wedged the tip under the edge, and pried up. The wood resisted, creaking with age, then popped free, releasing a hush of cold, stale air. Ethan blinked. Below the plank was a hollow space, wider than he expected. He removed 2 more boards until a rectangular opening appeared, just large enough for a man to fit through. Ranger whined softly, peering into the darkness. Ethan fetched his flashlight and lowered it into the hole. Jagged stone walls reflected the beam. A narrow ladder made of iron bars, rusted but intact, descended into the earth. "What the hell did you hide down here, Benjamin?" he muttered. Slowly, carefully, Ethan climbed down. Ranger paced above the hole, whining but obeying Ethan's gesture to stay. When Ethan's boots touched the packed dirt floor, he swept the flashlight across the chamber. It wasn't just a hole, it was a room, a man-made stone chamber carved into the earth, reinforced with timber beams darkened by time and moisture. Old lantern hooks clung to the walls. Rusted tools lay scattered as if dropped in haste decades earlier. And on the far wall, maps. Large geological maps, pinned with yellowed tacks and curling at the edges, depicting fault lines, groundwater flow, and mineral deposits around the Blue Ridge region. In the corner stood a leaning metal file cabinet, drawers half open, papers strewn across the floor like someone had rifled through them. Ethan lifted a sheet, an official document with the faded logo of Chimney Rock Mining Cone. The page detailed water contamination readings from 1973. Most of the numbers had been crossed out with black ink. Heavy, deliberate strokes. He kept moving, his pulse tightening. The chamber wasn't abandoned. Not long ago, someone had been here. Near the center of the room sat a steel safe bolted into the rock wall. Its front was scarred with drill marks, not random ones, but precise circular holes from a professional-grade bit. Someone had tried to break in, using equipment far more advanced than anything from Benjamin's time, but failed. Ethan crouched beside it. The metal felt cool, almost damp to the touch. The drill had penetrated partially, but the lock remained intact. He ran his fingers across the marks. Whoever attempted this knew what they were doing, and they had stopped only recently. There was no rust inside the drill scars. Fresh boot prints covered the dusty ground. Not Benjamin's, not old, current. A pair of prints were larger, wide-soled, like the kind worn by private contractors or security personnel. Another pair was smaller, narrower, maybe a scout. 3 men had stood in the woods last night. Had they been down here too? Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground cold. He raised the flashlight and scanned the chamber slowly. On a wooden table near the wall lay scattered documents, memos, handwritten notes, geological assessments. Some pages bore the Burnell Group insignia, a stylized mountain silhouette crossed with a mining pick. The same group whose symbol he saw last night, painted in charcoal behind the house. Ethan picked up a brittle sheet and read the header. Internal report. Do not archive. Water violation findings pending reassignment. At the bottom, a signature appeared, written in hurried strokes. Craig Burnell, head of the Burnell Group in the 1970s. Ranger barked suddenly from above, the sound sharp and urgent. Ethan's blood ran cold. He swept the flashlight across the chamber again. The ladder, the walls, the safe, the scattered documents. Everything sat still, but Ranger didn't bark at nothing. Ethan climbed quickly, his hands gripping the cold rungs, boots slipping slightly on old rust. When he reached the living room, Ranger was back toward the door, fur standing on end, gaze locked on the tree line outside. Ethan followed his stare. The woods were quiet, but not empty, a faint flicker of movement between the trunks. A shadow retreating deeper into the forest, stepping lightly, almost silently. Someone had been watching the house again. And not just watching. They had been inside the underground chamber that same morning. Ethan swallowed, pulse hammering. Whatever Benjamin hid under this house wasn't just old mining debris. It wasn't just contamination reports. It was something Burnell Group wanted buried so badly they were willing to return nearly 50 years later. And now they knew Ethan had found it. The dog pressed close to Ethan, trembling, not from fear, but from readiness. The same readiness that had saved Ethan's life more than once overseas. Yeah, Ethan whispered. I see it too. The shadow vanished completely. The summer hillside suddenly felt colder, and Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The air inside the stone chamber felt colder than before, as if the earth itself sensed what was coming. Ethan crouched beside the half-drilled safe, sweat running down his spine despite the summer heat above ground. Ranger stood near the ladder, his stance rigid, fur bristling in a sharp ridge down his spine. The shepherd's growl echoed faintly in the chamber, warning Ethan seconds before the danger arrived. A hard thud sounded above, boots striking wood. Ethan reached for the flashlight, but he wasn't fast enough. The ladder rattled violently, and 3 figures descended with practiced precision. The first man dropped to the ground with the confidence of someone used to exerting power. Dale Burnell, mid-50s, tall, with a thick chest and a square jaw peppered by gray stubble, landed heavily. His face carried the kind of arrogance that grows from a lifetime of getting whatever he wants. His eyes, cold, calculating steel, held no trace of hesitation. They were the eyes of a man raised inside wealth and determined to keep it by any means. His tailored black shirt clung to wide shoulders, and the scar slicing across his right knuckle suggested he wasn't afraid to use force himself. 2 men followed. The first, Rex Dalton, was built like a compact brawler, shorter than Dale but thick with muscle, with close-cropped blonde hair and a nose broken more than once. His sun-damaged skin and tattooed forearms hinted at a past and outlaw motorcycle cruise before Burnell hired him as muscle. The second, Miguel Arroyo, was lean, all sharp angles and tense motion. His dark eyes shifted constantly, scanning for threats. He moved with the quick, restless energy of someone who had grown up fighting for survival long before he learned to carry a gun. Ethan rose slowly, hands half raised. He kept his posture balanced, weight evenly distributed, ready if needed. You boys chose the wrong basement, he said quietly. Dale smirked, brushing dust from his sleeve. Spare me the small talk, Mr. Miller. You found something that doesn't belong to you. Something my father buried long before you were born. He stepped closer, boots grinding against the stone. Where are the documents? Ethan shook his head. I don't know what you're talking about. Miguel moved first, too fast for a warning. Ethan twisted aside, catching Miguel's wrist and slamming him into the wall. Rex lunged with a punch aimed at Ethan's ribs, but Ranger's snarl tore through the chamber as the shepherd launched himself between them, forcing Rex back. Chaos erupted instantly. Miguel staggered forward, grabbing for Ethan again. But Ethan shifted, military reflexes snapping into place. He ducked under Miguel's arm and delivered a hard elbow to the man's sternum. Miguel dropped to one knee, gasping. Rex charged, fists swinging, but Ranger met him mid-stride, crashing into his leg. Rex toppled, shouting as the dog pinned him down with a vicious snarl inches from his throat. Dale cursed and lunged for Ethan, grabbing the veteran's shirt. Ethan twisted, using Dale's weight against him, slamming him hard into the side of the safe. Metal rang. Dale groaned but kept fighting, throwing punches in blind fury. Ethan caught his forearm and drove his knee into Dale's side. The older man collapsed to the ground, winded. Seconds later, all three lay subdued, grunting, coughing, or pinned under Ranger's tense, growling form. Ethan tied each of them with old ropes from the wall, wrists bound behind their backs. "You picked the wrong house," he muttered. He barely had time to drag in a breath. A metallic click echoed above. Ranger whipped his head toward the ladder. Ethan turned. A man stood at the top, motionless, calm, deadly. Jonas Red, early 40s, tall and sinewy, descended with slow precision. His face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp like carved stone. A jagged scar ran from his lower lip to the base of his chin, a reminder of a knife fight he had survived years ago. His hair was cut short, jet black, peppered with silver, and his dark eyes held the chilling emptiness of someone who had smothered his conscience long ago. Jonas's reputation had followed him across state lines. An ex-contractor from private military units gone rogue, a man whose morality ended where his paycheck began. He reached the dirt floor and lifted a silenced handgun, the matte steel catching the beam of Ethan's flashlight. "I'm not here for gold," Jonas said, his voice low and almost gentle. "I'm here for the paperwork that destroys Burnell Group." He fired. The muffled shot cracked through the chamber, like a whispered death sentence. Ranger reacted before Ethan even saw the muzzle flare. The shepherd lunged, colliding with Jonas's arm and knocking the shot off course. The bullet tore into the dirt inches from Ethan's boot. Ethan rushed forward, grabbing Jonas's wrist. The two men slammed into the stone wall, the impact rattling dust from the ceiling. Jonas fought with cold efficiency. Sharp jabs aimed at Ethan's neck, quick knees toward the ribs. Ethan countered with solid, heavy strikes, learned from years in close-quarters combat. Ranger snapped at Jonas's leg, forcing him off balance. Ethan seized the opening. He wrenched the silenced pistol from Jonas's grip, slammed the man's arm hard against the wall once, twice, until Jonas dropped to his knees. A final shove sent him crashing into the dirt. Jonas lay stunned. Ethan stood above him, chest heaving, the silenced weapon steady in his grip. Ranger circled once, growling until Ethan touched his shoulder, a signal that it was over, for now. And in the dim glow of the flashlight, Ethan realized the truth. Burnell Group weren't thieves. They weren't hunters. They were desperate men terrified of what lay inside the safe. The secret Benjamin died protecting was powerful enough to make killers crawl out of the past. And Ethan had just declared war by surviving them. The last traces of underground dust still clung to Ethan's clothes as he climbed back into the living room. Ranger pressed close at his side. The shepherd's breathing was fast but steady, his amber eyes locked on the ladder as if daring anyone else to emerge from it. Ethan wiped dirt from his palms, picked up the phone he had dropped earlier, and dialed the sheriff's office. His voice was calm, steady, an old soldier slipping back into the disciplined clarity he thought he had left behind. 15 minutes later, the wail of approaching sirens rolled across the Asheville hillside like a hard-earned promise of safety. 2 patrol cars skidded to a stop on the gravel road. The first officer to step out was Sheriff Linda Carver, a woman in her early 50s with a tall, broad-shouldered frame and a determined jawline. Her auburn hair was tied back tightly, revealing a face marked by years of dealing with drunk brawlers, mountain disputes, and political pressure from families like the Burnells. Her skin was lightly freckled, her eyes a clear but weary green, eyes that had seen too many lies and not enough truth. Yet beneath her stern demeanor was a woman who had grown up poor in a factory town, and she carried that grit into every decision she made. Standing beside her was Deputy Mark Holloway, late 30s, lanky, with sandy blonde hair, a thin mustache, and a nervous energy he tried to hide behind stiff professionalism. His posture gave away a recent back injury, an old warehouse accident before he joined the force that made him cautious in his movements but fearless when it mattered. "Mr. Miller," Sheriff Carver said, scanning the house with a sharp gaze, "we got your call. Tell me what I'm walking into." "You're walking into 50 years of buried crimes," Ethan replied. He led them to the open floorboards. "And the men responsible are tied up down there." Sheriff Carver stiffened. "Alive?" "Unfortunately," Ethan muttered. When she and Deputy Holloway descended into the stone chamber and saw Dale Burnell, Rex Dalton, Miguel Arroyo, and the still groggy Jonas Red, she blew out a long breath. "Well, I'll be damned. Burnell's heirs always bragged about owning the county, but this? Her voice trailed off as she lifted several folders from the table. Contamination reports, signatures, maps. A paper trail decades long. Within an hour, federal agents arrived, 2 vehicles from the Environmental Crime Division of the Department of Justice. The lead agent, Agent Samuel Dwyer, was a man in his late 40s with a lean, severe build. His short black hair was graying at the sides, and deep creases framed his mouth as if he had spent a lifetime frowning at crime scenes. He spoke little, but when he did, his baritone voice carried the weight of someone who had dismantled environmental cover-ups across half the country. His sharp blue eyes swept across the chamber with clinical precision. "You just cracked open the largest buried water violation case this state has ever seen," Dwyer said. "And without you, this would have stayed hidden." Ethan simply nodded. He wasn't looking for praise. Ranger sat beside him, tail still, gaze steady, an old soldier beside an older one. Dale Burnell spat bitterly as agents cuffed him. "You don't know what you're doing, Miller. You think justice matters? My father built half this region." "Yeah," Ethan said quietly, "and he poisoned the other half." Dale's face twisted with rage as he was hauled up the ladder. By late afternoon, the property swarmed with investigators, evidence technicians, and state officials. Boxes of documents were cataloged, water samples taken, photos snapped. Burnell Group's last line of control crumbled with every sealed bag of evidence climbing out of the earth. News spread by evening, reports flashing across local stations, then statewide outlets. The Burnell Group was officially under federal investigation. Families who'd lost loved ones to contaminated wells decades ago were coming forward with reopened claims. Old grief resurfaced, but this time with a pathway to justice. And the gold bars? When Agent Dwyer confirmed they were not illegal property, never reported, never linked to wrongdoing, Ethan faced a choice. It wasn't a long one. 2 weeks later, the 8 bars sat inside a donation vault at the Asheville Community Trust Fund. The money would support medical aid for families affected by the contamination, legal fees for reopening cases, and a restoration project for nearby water sources. Ethan asked for no recognition. "No one needs to know where it came from," he told the board director, a gentle gray-haired widow named Mrs. Rayburn. "Just use it for the people who lost the most." Summer eased toward its final stretch. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, Ethan sat on the front steps of the house that had once been a vault of secrets. Ranger rested his head on Ethan's knee, exhaling softly, as if releasing the last remnants of fear. The breeze carried the scent of warm pine and distant river water, clean water. Ethan looked out over the hills, feeling something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Peace. He brushed Ranger's fur gently. "We brought the truth to light," he whispered. "And maybe, just maybe, we finally found a home." The shepherd nudged closer, tail tapping once against the wooden step. And for the first time since returning from war, Ethan let himself believe they were exactly where they were meant to be. In the quiet that followed Ethan's long summer of truth, something deeper shimmered beneath the story, something that didn't belong to gold bars, hidden chambers, or the fall of a powerful family. It was the reminder that sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive in flashes of light, but in quiet moments of courage. Moments when ordinary people choose to do what is right, even when no one is watching. Some say God works through storms and revelations. Others say he works through the steady loyalty of a dog, or the gentle nudge that leads us toward the truth we were meant to find. But maybe the real miracle is this, that in a world full of darkness, there are still hearts willing to bring light back into it. And just like Ethan discovered a purpose he thought he had lost, perhaps each of us, somewhere in our own daily struggles, our quiet battles, our tired mornings and long nights, are being guided by a hand greater than we know. A hand that sees us, protects us, and leads us home in ways we don't always recognize until the story is over. If this tale touched you, let us know where you're watching from. Share your thoughts, your city, your prayers. And if you believe in second chances, in redemption, or simply in the quiet miracles that God still sends into this world, please share this video with someone who might need a little hope today. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the stories ahead. May God bless you, your family, and every step you take in the days to come.